So here I've opened an example script provided to me by the professor. You can see up here in the comments, it says that this is from lecture 3, and the goal of this script is to read data, plot histograms, and get descriptives. This is great, by the way, having these comments at the top that say what your script is for. I find scripts from years ago, and if I didn't do that, I always am wondering, wait, what is this for? And then I have to go through it to figure out what exactly I did. For this, it's not a big deal. You might get to make some complicated scripts though, so save your future self some trouble. Just do this. Anyway, so what we're going to do right now is just walk through the things in here just to make sure you understand exactly what this script is doing and how it's doing it. We'll use the knowledge we learned from the functions video, so if you're not comfortable with functions, I would go back and listen to that. Otherwise, it's just simple interpretation. This is going to be a great practice for you to build up because this is how stats works a lot of the time. You're trying to do an analysis, you whine to your friend about how XYZ won't work. They figured that out 4 years ago and they send you a script. Maybe they weren't nice and didn't put this kind of information at the top, so you're given something you then have to figure out, okay, how did they get it to work? So Professor Conway is really great about putting comments every step of the way. And I would say one thing to do when you're building a script is if you know exactly what you're trying to do, or even if you just know kind of a few things you want to do, one great way to plan out a script is to write out the comments. So imagine without all these functions in here. So if I knew, well, you always have to load library. So if I knew first I need to load a library, then I'm going to have to read in the data. Then I want to find out what kind of object. If you know these are the things you're going to want to do, write that out in the comments. And then afterwards, you can fill in everywhere there's a comment, you can fill in something that does that thing. So not only will you know in the future what were you trying to do, it's just a great way to kind of plan out the problem you're trying to solve and the statistics you're trying to do, especially if there's multiple steps. So that's a great practice. So let's just walk through the functions here. So load library, hopefully everyone remembers to load a library. So you just use the library function and the argument sake, because that's the name of the library you're trying to load. And he only has one library. You could have multiple libraries. So if I was doing something complicated, there could be another library here. So it might be load libraries on this comment. And that's actually fairly common. So if you get a script with lots of libraries, that's what's going on. So the next thing we're doing is we're reading the data into the data frame using the read.table function. The read.table function is specifically designed to read in data of a certain format. There are other functions that read in different formats, so it's really important to know exactly what data you're trying to load in. So I've opened up the data. I'm going to pull it up right here. And you can see what we've got are 4 columns. It's easier to see in the data portion. We've got 4 columns of values, and they're each separated by a tab. So this is called tab delimited. So if you end up with an Excel file, you can actually go in there and save your data as tab delimited. It's under the save as. You have to go to the drop down menu and find it. And I'm sure that's actually what the professor did. But you can also see it looks like they're not aligned, but each of these data names, variable names, like red truck, for example, is separated by exactly 1 tab. So that's how R is going to parse this. Using read.table, it'll take each line, split it by the tabs, and then put anything before the first tab in column 1, everything before the second tab in column 2, etc. If you tried to use a different function to read this data in, it wouldn't work because it needs to be looking for the tabs. There are other functions that look for commas. So you might have heard of CSV, that's called a comma separated, I guess what's V stand for, vector. I never actually thought about that before. CSV files, though, it's the same idea, but instead of separating each column by a tab, it separates each column by a comma. So that would be read.csv, so if you need to do that. But anyway, so what he did here was he called read.table. He gave it 2 arguments. The first one, even though it's not labeled, is the file. So this is just the name of the file in your directory. Notice he just gives the file name, so it's going to look for this file in your current working directory. Then he did the comma to separate the 2 arguments, and the second argument is a header argument. So header just tells R whether or not your data set has a header. So header is just labels for your data, and we have that. So we need to make sure R knows that so it doesn't count these 4 guys as part of the actual data. It's just labels, it's not data. So to do that, you have to say header equals, you can either type out true or the capital T. I just do capital T. And you can see this whole function read.table is being fed into a variable called ratings. So this little arrow is what tells R to take the output of read.table and shove it into ratings. Otherwise, it would just read the table and not save it anywhere. So make sure you're pointing it into a variable so that you can then call that variable and work on the data in that variable. The next thing he's doing is seeing what kind of object it is. He's using the class function. So the argument of class function is any variable on your workspace. And so you can see he's just asking what is the class type of the ratings variable I just made. And that's a good way to check to make sure it worked okay. So the next thing he's doing is listing the names of the variables in his data frame. He's actually being very explicit here. List the names of variables in the data frame called ratings. So in order to do that, the function is called names. Names will take any data frame you feed it. So here we fed it ratings as an argument and just list the variables within it. And so if you did this and you did not get the names that were at the top here, red truck, whoop whoop, etc., that means you did something wrong up here. So it's another great check to make sure, all right, I did everything right. Then things are going to get a little bit complicated. I just want to go through this one. This function can look confusing, but it's not as confusing as it looks if you split it up, because it's actually multiple functions stuck inside each other. So you can see overall he's using the layout function, so layout in parentheses. And in layout, he's given one giant argument. I know this is really hard to see, but let me just cut this out, delete this, and paste it here. So I just took what was in layout and pasted it there. So inside layout was this one argument. The argument to layout is any kind of matrix. So what layout does is it takes your plot window and just splits it up into segments based on whatever kind of matrix you want. So you could have done this. So you could have said, all right, create a matrix called data, and then did this. I mean, in the wrong, you would need to flip the order of this. This might make it a little clearer what's going on. We're creating a matrix, and then we're just saying use that matrix to create a layout. So layout pops open the window and then splits it up so you can then stick a separate picture into each cell of the matrix. All right, so now hopefully that's a little clearer. So then what is matrix? So matrix is another function, and you see it has 1, 2, 3, 4 arguments. So let's go through those arguments in terms. So matrix, the types of arguments it wants, the first thing you're giving it is actually another function. This is turtles all the way down, guys. So this C is a function that creates lists. So you see you're creating a list with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. This actually can be any numbers you want as long as they kind of go in a sequential order. All this tells R is whenever you create your first histogram, it's going to put it in the lowest number. That's what I found anyway with my test. So if I flip 2 and 1, so if it was like this, then the first histogram I run will be in the second slot, not the first. So that's all that's doing. So that's the first argument of matrix. The next two, if you want to make this completely transparent, you can do this. So these are just the numbers of rows and columns you want in your matrix. So he just had 2 and 2 because R knows that the second and third arguments are the numbers of rows and numbers of columns. I'm just making this completely clear. So the first one, in row equals 2, I'm telling R, all right, this list I gave you, I want you to split it into 2 rows, and I want each of those rows to have 2 columns. So you need to make sure that the 2 numbers here multiply to encompass the number of items you have here. So hopefully that's not too confusing. So you're creating a matrix, you want these items in it, and you want it split into a matrix that has 2 rows and 2 columns. Again, feel free to keep it like this if you like the simplicity of it, but I tend to write it like this just to keep it completely clear. This last argument, by row equals true, is telling R how to split these numbers into a matrix. So by row means I want you, when you're taking 1, 2, 3, 4, I want you to split it by rows first. So instead of going, so I have 2 rows and 2 columns. It could be, so think about it, if it's by row, it's going to go 1, 2, and then it's going to go to the next row, 3, 4. So that's what by row looks like. by column, it would fill in the first two columns first. So it'd be like 1, 2, and it's going to go to the next column, 3, 4. This may seem trivial, and it kind of is, in that you can fudge around which ones you do first to make it look however you want, but it's just kind of important to know what exactly you're asking R to do. So since I have tagged by row equals true, I know it's going to go through each row before going to the next. So if you had a matrix that's 2 rows and 4 columns, it would do something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's just really easy to follow exactly what you're doing, and you'll know exactly what to expect. And so that's what this is. When I first saw this, I was very confused. One great thing to do is, if you just don't know what's going on, split it up. So when I was learning this, I took the argument of layout, pulled it out, then argued a matrix, and then looked exactly what was in each of these. And remember, you can always go to your console and say, help matrix, I don't get what's going on at all. And you can see it tells you what I just told you. You take data, number rows, number columns, whether you want by rows or not, and another optional argument we don't pay attention to. So now so far we've imported our data, we've made sure we did it right, and we've created a window that will fit 4 plots. The next thing we're doing is just making the plot. So we want to plot 4 histograms, one of each of these guys, these variables. And so this is just using the function hist. I walked through hist in grueling detail in my functions video, so feel free to check that again. If you've seen that, you remember that hist has one obligatory argument. The first thing you give it is the data. And we'll get into what exactly this thing is doing in a minute. And then you can have a bunch of optional arguments. Here the professor's just added one optional argument of the XLab. So XLab stands for X label. So he's changing all the X labels to say rating. So you can see they all 4 here say rating. You could have done more optional arguments, so feel free to go back to my functions video or to call help hist if you want to find out more about hist. But this is all we're doing. But let's backtrack to this first argument. What's going on here? So hist of ratings $, whoop whoop. So what we're trying to do is create histograms of each variable. All we have loaded into Workspace right now, though, is the whole data frame. How do you then call a specific variable within that data frame? You do it like this. So you can see what he wrote, ratings, right here, before the $, is the name of the data frame he's trying to access on the workspace. Then you put the $, and then after the $, goes the name of the variable in your workspace that you want to call. So I always remember it as data frame $ variable, just remembering that the over-encompassing data file goes first, and then the specific one goes second. You can see he did that for all 4. 2 things to keep in mind here. First, the order, I already mentioned that. Data frame goes before $. So if I accidentally wrote whoop whoop $ ratings, it's going to try to find a data frame called whoop whoop. That doesn't exist, so make sure you get that order right. The other thing to keep in mind is spelling. So you have to make sure each of these are spelled exactly how they are in the data set. So ratings, that you picked, it's up here. That's whatever you named your data frame. It can't be ratings or something like that. It's case sensitive, so it has to match exactly. And then whoop whoop also has to match exactly. So here you can see in the data frame, whoop whoop was spelled with capital W's, no space. So if I had done whoop whoop, this isn't going to work. So keep that in mind. And that's really all you need to interpret these for. They all 4 do the same kind of thing, just switching variables. So first whoop whoop, then red truck, then hobnob, then foreplay. And so these are going to pop in to your matrix one at a time. So last thing the professor wanted to do in the script was to get some descriptive statistics. So the comment, descriptive statistics for the variables in the data frame called ratings. So describe is a function in the psych package, which is why we had to load it up here. But it's a function that takes, here it's taking an entire data frame. You can also give it a specific variable. So if you only wanted the descriptives for whoop whoop, you could do that. And so that would just get you the descriptors for a single variable. But what's great about it is that it can also just do an entire data frame. So it's a great way to just see what's going on in your entire data set at once. And the reason why this is such a great function is that it's actually combining multiple functions. So the output gives you mean and standard deviation, all these different things that you could actually ask for separately. So there actually is a function called mean I didn't give it an argument, but you can see it does exist, and there is a function called SD, same thing. It gives you a standard deviation. The scribe is doing all that for you. So it's a great shorthand to just get all those things without having to ask for them each individually, which is why we're going through the bother of actually downloading the library, because it's handy. And that's actually it. That's the whole script. So hopefully just walking through it made it a little bit clear exactly how it works and what it's doing. And also hopefully you learned a couple tricks, especially going through this layout function, of how to parse complicated inputs. And hopefully this helped out a little bit.